And our bill would basically make it illegal for the FBI or Department of Homeland Security or the White House or the CDC. It would be illegal for them to meet with anybody in the media, not just internet companies, but anybody in the legacy media as well, or the print media. It would be illegal, and they would be fired if they were found to be meeting to discuss, cajole, compel, coerce, any kind of discussion to limit constitutionally protected speech. And we decided to use the wording constitutionally protected speech because the FBI pushes back and says, well, we talked to them about taking down child pornography. Well, that's against the law, child pornography. It's not constitutionally protected speech. So it's a good way of trying to divide out what the government can and cannot do. Because Christopher Wray pushes back and says, well, we talk to Facebook about putting terrorist posts. People are recruiting for Hamas. We want that taken down. Well, we're not objecting to stopping people from joining a violent group. So there are limitations on speech, but there is constitutionally protected speech. And me telling you that masks don't work or that your child doesn't need a vaccine for COVID, that is my opinion based on the way I've seen the science, but that is constitutionally protected, and in no way should the FBI or Department of Homeland Security or some outsourced project to Stanford or some other Berkeley be allowed to coerce them to take down my speech.
Well, let's jump into deception because, a core element of the deception was incredibly significant censorship, but actually more than that, because it was the ability of the mechanism that can manufacture almost perceived consensus among us that something like a lab leak is just a toxic idea. We're not even allowed to think about that. Why don't you just give me the thesis of the book? Like, what will people discover when they read it?
I think what is mind-boggling about this cover-up is how extensive it is and how virtually everything they said in private, they said the opposite in the public at the same time. Now, some of them will say, oh, our thoughts evolved and we were playing devil's advocate at this time and now, we have discovered this. It's not so. In February 1st of 2020, Fauci and a group of scientists got together, both by phone call, Zoom, Skype, and they have a meeting. And in that meeting, they all conclude, and in Fauci's word, he writes the summary of the meeting. He says, we've looked at the genetic sequence of the virus. It looks manipulated. It looks like it's been manipulated purposely in a lab to make it more infectious for humans. And we're doubly worried because we know that lab in Wuhan does gain-of-function research. Fast forward a year later, publicly to me, he denies fervently that there's any kind of has ever funded gain of function in Wuhan. So what he says in private is the opposite of what he's saying in public. And this went on throughout the spring of 2020. And then it turns out the scientists that are organizing many of these things are actually the scientists that were funding the lab in Wuhan. They actually have a direct conflict of interest because they are the ones that will be culpable. Same with Anthony Fauci. Why is he so wedded to trying to make you believe it came from the animal kingdom and not the lab? Because he funded the lab. If it comes out that he funded the lab and that that's where the pandemic arose, there's a certain amount of culpability he has for the pandemic. So they're doing everything they can to escape any kind of attachment to that money or to gain of function because it attaches guilt for the pandemic to them.
What would you say is the most surprising thing that you found? And I mean, you have a lot of skepticism about how all these systems work, but what would you say is the most surprising thing?
How extensive the cover-up was. It wasn't just Anthony Fauci and a few scientists, that it reaches throughout probably 8 different divisions of our government, 8 different departments of government, that this had been going on a long period of time and they're still hiding this, that most of this is non-classified and still being hidden. We finally got Democrats to agree unanimously in the Senate and in the House to declassify all the COVID documents and for Biden to reveal them. Since that, we've gotten 0 pieces of information from Biden. Most of the stuff is already declassified. They're hiding declassified material. HHS and NIH have been more secretive and hiding more stuff than the CIA does. We've had more forthcoming meetings with the CIA and the FBI and the Department of Energy than HHS. We've been asking for documents and they'll send us a 250-page document with everything redacted. We finally got the Democrat chairman, Peters, of the Homeland Security to sign letters, and he signed letters 4 months ago, and we've still got no documents. So this is really a massive cover-up, and I suspect it's because there's many more links to the funding, and there was probably discussion of the funding. One of the colossal things that Fauci did that led to all of this is that Fauci decided not to have the safety committee look at this. They went around the safety committee. The money goes to Wuhan, and the safety committee never reviewed it. And who he says, well, I had dozens of scientists up and down who told me it wasn't gain of function. Well, then we should see the minutes of those meetings where the discussion happened. I wanted to see the discussion over, was it safe or unsafe to send this money to Wuhan? And if he says all my scientists told me it wasn't, I want to see the dialogue. I want to see the arguments the scientists made for why we should have been doing this dangerous research in a totalitarian country in a lab that was of a lower safety level than almost every scientist in the world agrees they shouldn't have been doing it there. And then to make matters worse, when it finally happens, when the accident happens, China, of course, covers all of it up and won't admit to anything. It took them 3 months to admit that there was a contagion. And even then they said it wasn't going people to people for another 2 weeks until they couldn't deny that. So at every step of the way, there's been a cover up that began in China. But the surprising thing was how extensive it is in our country and how our country circled the wagons to prevent knowledge, much as they do in a totalitarian country like China.
Don't forget to subscribe to our Alerts newsletter, and you'll never miss an episode.